Okay, so I shall start the topic of macroeconomics with the circular flow of income diagram. By discussing this particular topic, I will introduce to you what exactly is the central problem of an economy. If you have understood by this time, whenever you talk about microeconomics different from macroeconomics or macroeconomics different from microeconomics, what we have understood is that in microeconomics, we deal with the economic behavior of individual units. Individual units can be individual consumers, individual producers, individual market, and so on. Whereas, when you deal with macroeconomics, we study the economic behavior, we address certain central problems, certain critical problems of an economy, but at the aggregate level, not at the individual level. It's not about an individual consumer's economic behavior or an individual producer's economic behavior. It is rather about the aggregate consumption behavior, aggregate production behavior, aggregate employment behavior, average inflation rate, the inflation rate, the price, average price level, which is an aggregate behavior or an average behavior of the total. Those are the topics we are going to discuss under macroeconomics. There is no such watertight compartment between the two. One gives rise to the other, obviously, but then there is a need to discuss them independent of each other. And as you proceed with the topics, you'll get to know why it is important to study them separately, micro and macro. So what I'm going to discuss is, to begin with, what are the central problems or the central issues, critical issues we address in macroeconomics? And given those central issues which I shall highlight, I shall introduce to you the circular flow of income diagrams through which you will get to know who are the economic agents, how do they interact among themselves, how are they interdependent, what are their roles, and through their interaction, through their interdependence, what happens to an economy. So that is what we are going to discuss in macroeconomics. And obviously, there are problems. Unless there are problems, there is no need to study macroeconomics. So obviously, we are talking about problems. And what are those problems? What are those central problems we need to address?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Your slides are not changing.
Yeah, I have not changed. Now I'm changing. Is it changing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So to begin with, I would like to highlight certain important issues which fall under the ambit of macroeconomics, which we address in macroeconomics, different from microeconomics. One of the central problems that we like to address or we address in macroeconomics is how to attain long-run economic growth. So the moment we talk about economic growth, we are referring to the growth of the income. The income at the aggregate level, not individual income we are talking about. It is the national income. It is the income of an economy. How does the income change over time? You might have heard in last financial year, last financial year we have experienced negative growth rate of income, India's income. I'm talking about India GDP, gross domestic product, which is a variant of income. But in the past, we have experienced positive economic growth. Again, it is expected that in the current fiscal, the growth rate of GDP is likely to be positive 9.2%. You might have read here and there that it is predicted that it is estimated that India's growth rate is going to be 9.2%. So how does an economy achieve positive growth rate? And then how that growth rate keeps increasing over time? That becomes a very important issue needing attention. What determines the economic growth? What are the factors that deter economic growth? And how can ensure that economic growth is maintained and sustained over time? We attain a higher economic growth and we maintain and sustain that over time through the long run. That becomes a very important topic of macroeconomics. As a corollary to that, we experience business fluctuations. With the change in the growth rate, we experience business fluctuation or a business cycle. Sometimes the economy in question experiences boom or prosperity, at some other times it experiences recession or downswing. As just I was telling about this negative growth rate, for 2 consecutive quarters, India experienced negative growth rate. So technically, when an economy in question experiences negative growth rate for 2 consecutive quarters of a year, we say that the economy is into recession. So how to ensure that economy doesn't experience recession? Recession is nothing new to any economy of the world, and particularly to the advanced economies. How to ensure that there is fine macroeconomic balance? There is equilibrium. The economy overcomes the recession, which is basically a type of business cycle the economy experiences. How it can overcome recession? There are theories to address that. What you need to do to ensure that recession doesn't occur, and if it has occurred, how can we cure it? How can you get out of the crisis? Or in a sense, how does an economy attain equilibrium income? What do you mean by equilibrium income? In a particular time period, the economy in question attains equilibrium income when aggregate demand for goods and services becomes equal to the aggregate supply of goods and services. All that is produced is demanded. If all that is produced is not demanded, there is overproduction in the economy. That overproduction may lead to recession. So how to ensure that all that is produced is demanded? And what happens? Who are the economic agents? Who are those players in the economy? What do they do? And what kind of an intervention strategy we should come up with so that we can ensure equilibrium income? So that becomes yet another very important topic of macroeconomics. That means while ensuring economic growth in the long run, we must also ensure that the economy is attaining equilibrium income. Every new income is an equilibrium income. How to ensure that? So it's not that you achieve higher and higher economic growth. You must ensure that each new income is an equilibrium income. Third one is unemployment or employment. While producing output, generating income, we must also ensure that employment is created. All the resources are fully employed, and particularly labor as a resource. So the employment scenario or the unemployment scenario in economic experiences is very much linked to the kinds of business fluctuation the economy experiences. In times of recession, we might see large-scale unemployment, whereas in times of prosperity, in times of boom, the economy may experience lesser unemployment. So employment is very much an important topic of macroeconomics related to the economic growth and fluctuation. So these three, long-run economic growth, business fluctuation, and as a corollary to both, the scenario of employment or unemployment, these three are interrelated, and they address one part of the story that is all about income, output produced in the economy, demanded, and the equilibrium attained, and in the process, we create employment. But the other part, which also equally gains significance or becomes an important topic of macroeconomics, is the price instability. On the one side, we talk about economic fluctuation or the business cycle, economic instability. On the other side, we talk about price instability. How to ensure that general price level of the economy is stable. There is neither inflation nor deflation. Or even if there is inflation, it is mild, it is under control. We don't experience hyperinflation, suppose. So there are different types of inflation we talk about. So what is inflation? It is nothing but the sustained rise in the average price level of all the goods and services. When the general price level keeps rising, the economy in question experiences inflation. When the average price level decreases over time, then the economy in question experiences deflation. So these are the two types of price fluctuations in economic experiences. So how to ensure price stability? That becomes a very important topic of macroeconomics. When I say price stability, one might say that there should not be either inflation or deflation. There should be, and and particularly most of the economies experience inflation, rise in the price level. But then it is never argued that there should be zero inflation. It is argued that, there is a common kind of advocacy in favor of mild inflation, something which is tolerable. So this is yet another topic of macroeconomics we cover. Given
Sir,
this,
but
yes.
How can even mild inflation be good?
Because this is something, okay, you have asked me, I'll explain, but then when this topic will come up, we'll discuss much in detail. Neither of them truly is good, neither inflation nor deflation. Theoretically speaking, one would say there should be zero, there should be price stability, implying that there is zero inflation. But it is argued that inflation has a typical positive effect called Greige effect, implying thereby that what is the role of the grease in a vehicle? It is a kind of a lubricant that keeps the vehicle in good order. So that kind of, you can say, drawing an analogy, you can say that inflation could be beneficial sometimes for economic growth. When there is a rise in the price level, the producers who produce the goods and services are inclined to produce more, because they would be in a position to sell the goods and services at higher and higher prices. But too much of inflation is bad, because very high inflation would also lead to negative growth, or the growth rate will fall, growth rate of output will fall, because too much of inflation would lead to decline in the demand for goods and services. So when mild inflation is something that the producers invite.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, but those business business parties would go and get those materials on inflated price also, no? That
Yeah.
materials that they would just use in this making those products.
Yes. At the end of the day, you don't know what is the reason for the rise in the price level. See, if what I'm telling is that if there is inflation, inflation may signify that there is rise in the price level at which the producers are selling the goods. Now, what we have said is that they might be buying the inputs at a higher cost. So actually, they are not the net beneficiaries. They are not the net beneficiaries of these rising prices.
Okay.
That's what we are telling, that because input cost is high, that is the reason why the price is high, the price at which they are selling the product. So they should not be happy. The producers should not be happy or may not be happy. But there is many a time the producers are guided by some behavioral biases. That is one thing. We always, as consumers, we always get, perceptually, we think that if there is a rise in price, it burns our pocket. But producers always think that if there is rise in price, it gives them some additional revenues. But what is the net result, whether they really earn or not, that depends upon several factors. Whether the rise in price that gets reflected in the selling of the product is just cost inclusive, or it is more than that. But there is always a behavioral bias. The producers are happy when they see there is rise in price. Producers are unhappy when there is a fall in price. And it is a kind of a chicken egg problem. When the price rises, they blame the input cost, and thus they increase the price. As because they're increasing the prices, that also causes the input cost to rise in future. Again, there is a further rise in the price. So we are into that kind of a vicious cycle as well. But it is something which has been proven over time that between inflation and deflation, you might be wondering that possibly deflation is a good thing. That if there is a continuous fall in the price, it is good. It is never good. Deflation is never good for any economy of the world. Deflation is growth retarding, whereas inflation is growth promoting. But again, having said that, as I told you, a minimum level of inflation is, or a certain level of inflation is growth promoting, not a very high level of inflation. And that is the reason across the globe we are talking these days about something called inflation targeting. We never talk about zero inflation. Rather, we talk about inflation targeting. How much an economy can tolerate. For example, in a country like India, currently we are of the opinion that, economists are of the opinion that about 3% of inflation is something the Indian economy can tolerate. So it will promote growth. So if the growth rate is going above this targeted inflation rate, inflation rate is going above the targeted rate, then we should intervene. Otherwise, it is okay if the inflation rate is about 3% or so. But if you look at the history of the Indian economy, there is a time when the growth rate, inflation rate was as high as 16%. Prior to 1990s, the inflation rate was about 16%, double-digit inflation, what we used to say. Today, the things have become different since last many years. The inflation rate has remained single-digit, and it has been below 5% on most of the occasions. So we have been able to contain inflation. Okay, this pandemic has brought in some, scenarios which are beyond our tolerance. That's a different thing, because pandemic is not a normal time period. So you cannot expect the economy to behave the way it has to behave in a normal condition. So now you might see nothing of the economic model I'm talking about will work the way it should work in a normal situation. That's a different thing. But mild inflation is something, as I told you, that could be good. But then there is debate. The economists are divided over this issue. While some say inflation creates a Grigg effect, some say inflation creates a sand effect. Okay, so that means if there is inflation, then it would create frictions in the economy. Inflation will not allow the economy to grow. What you are thinking to be beneficial may not be beneficial. But then there has been a kind of a convergence of the two ideas. What we then observe, if you like to see, does inflation affect income growth or not? You can run a typical regression model. Time series regression model, suppose over time, you have taken inflation data and income growth data over the last 20 years of the Indian economy. You might see something very interesting. You can take inflation and square of the inflation as a variable in the model, as two variables, inflation and the square of the inflation as a variable, to find out what is the effect of inflation on economic growth. You might find something very interesting, that the inflation, the coefficient of the inflation, the slope coefficient of the inflation will be positive with respect to, we are talking about growth. So as far as growth is concerned, the slope coefficient of inflation will be positive, which would imply that as inflation increases, the income growth will be higher and higher. But then you have introduced into the same multiple regression model, you have introduced one more term, that is square of inflation squared. And that coefficient has come out to be negative and significant, which implies that beyond a threshold level of inflation, the economic growth decreases. So what does it mean? It implies that mild inflation, in inflation up to a certain level, has the capability to create or generate Grigg effect. Beyond the threshold, it creates sand effect. So it would vary from country to country. Maybe in India, we'll see 5% inflation is the threshold inflation. For USA, it could be 3%. Beyond 3%, there would be sand effect. In Indonesia, it could be 7%. So it would vary from country to country, depending upon all other factors which affect the scenario with respect to growth of income and all that. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm not getting into the debate. It's a very interesting topic to discuss. Then we find out why inflation occurs. There are also debates on that. There are theories on that. So that will be covered separately in another topic. So this is basically what I'm doing now. I'm just introducing to you what are the central issues we address in macroeconomics. I'm not actually getting into the topic at this point in time. So given this economic cycle and the price fluctuation, what is necessary is we'll have to come up with the policies, government policies, which will address the problems. If there are problems with respect to long-run economic growth, there are problems with respect to business fluctuation, there are problems of unemployment, there is inflation, then how can you overcome it? So we need to come up with government policies. So there are several macroeconomic policies which you formulate from time to time. Two major policies which decide the fate of an economy in a particular time period or maybe in the long run are fiscal policy and the monetary policy. There are other policies also, but these are the two major policies. Fiscal policy is the tax and expenditure and debt policy on the part of the government. So government comes up with various taxation measures, direct and indirect taxes. You know, recently we have come up with GST, goods and services tax, a new tax regime. Expenditure policy, where to spend, how much to spend, whether you should spend more on infrastructure building or more revenue expenditure and all that. More capital expenditure or more revenue expenditure. And then what would be the source of financing the spending? It may not be always possible on the part of an economy to ensure that the total government revenue is equal to total expenditure. Government comes up with three kinds of budgets. Every year, you know that in a country like India, the finance minister of the country presents the budget in the parliament. Three kinds of budgets can be presented: deficit budget, surplus budget, and balanced budget. In India, we have always presented deficit budgets. What is that? Our total government expenditure is greater than, has always been greater than the total government revenues. What are the government revenues? Tax revenues and non-tax revenues. Government collects taxes from the people, so it is a source of revenue. And then government also has some non-tax revenue sources, like government owns some PSUs in a country like India. ONGC is owned by government. Indian Railway is owned by government. So if there are profits, these units make, government has a source of revenue for itself, which is a non-tax revenue. So expenditure the government makes is always greater than the revenue it collects. So that leads to borrowing. Government borrows. So government has three sources of borrowing. It can borrow from the apex bank of the country. Like in our case, apex bank is Reserve Bank of India. It can borrow from the apex bank of the country. It can borrow from the public, you and me, by floating bonds, government securities. Or it can borrow from abroad, from international agencies like IMF and World Bank, as India did in 1990s. It borrowed from IMF and World Bank. Again, I'm not going to discuss now those things. Those things will come up in course of various topics. So fiscal policy covers all these issues. The government presents a deficit budget or a surplus budget or a balanced budget. Surplus budget means expenditure is less than the income on the part of the government. Balanced budget is one where expenditure is exactly equal to the income. Depending upon the types of business fluctuation or the inflation of the economy or the price instability the economy is experiencing, government comes up with various types of fiscal policies. Expansionary fiscal policy, contractionary fiscal policy, depending upon what is the state of affairs as far as business fluctuation is concerned, as far as price fluctuation is concerned. Because these policies can address both. We can take care of the economic fluctuation. We can also take care of price fluctuation through right government policies, fiscal policies. Similarly, monetary policies, like where the apex bank of the country formulates various policies. Like basically, it can be expansionary monetary policy or contractionary monetary policy. The apex bank of every country is responsible to control the money supply in the economy. So in order to control money supply, it comes up with various measures, quantitative and qualitative measures. Some of the quantitative measures, if you talk about, one is suppose bank rate. Another is CRR. You might have heard those terms, but again, these things will be discussed later on. CRR, cash reserve ratio. SLR, statutory liquidity ratio. These are repo rate, reverse repo rate. So these are different instruments in the hands of the Reserve Bank of India to introduce under monetary policy to take care of the economy with respect to economic fluctuation and the price fluctuation. In addition to these fiscal and monetary policies, there are many other independent macroeconomic policies. They can be exempt policy like export and import policy. There can be some tax measures. There can be some welfare measures, welfare policies for the people below poverty line, and so on. Some infrastructure policies, some business policies. So those are all different policies. Even recently we came up with some farm laws, 3 farm laws which were finally withdrawn by the government. These are all different interventions government makes from time to time, depending upon the requirements. So government is there to formulate policies, implement them in the interest of the country, interest of certain groups of people, like be it farmers, be it industries, and so on and so forth. So these are the issues we address in macroeconomics. In a nutshell, if I say this is the scope of macroeconomics. But let me clarify that all that I present here is simply an indicative list of issues that we address in macroeconomics. There are many other issues we also address in macroeconomics. They more or less fit into these topics that I talk about. Having said this, let me now come to discuss the circular flow diagram, circular flow of income diagram, to highlight how the different economic agents interact among themselves, what are their roles, and in the process what happens to an economy. And that would address some of the macroeconomic issues just I highlighted in the previous slide, what I showed you. But before I start the discussion on the circular flow of income diagram, let me first define what income is, because I'm going to talk about circular flow of income. So you must know what income is. But here, and this is again a topic which will be covered by Professor Sahu. I think he might have started, or he will start it soon. So you'll get to know the measurement of national income, various methods of measuring national income, various types of income. But here, I'm only going to talk about one variant of income, that is gross domestic product, or GDP. There are other types of income as well. Gross national product, GNP, net domestic product, NDP, net national product, NNP. So these are different variants of income, total income of an economy. But I'm not going to discuss all of them, because as I said that this will be separately discussed in another topic. What is the difference among all the terms I used? How are they measured? And all that. But for the sake of presenting the circular flow of income, I would just present one definition, one variant of income, that is GDP, and its definition, just for you to understand what is income, what is GDP. But later on, as I told you, it will be covered much in detail by Professor Sahu in National Income Accounting chapter. So, if I talk about GDP, one variant of income, we can define that as the market value of all the goods, all the final goods and services produced in an economy in a specific time period. So as you can see here, this definition has many different terms which have specific meanings. Market value or monetary value, finished goods, then I am using the term goods and services, then I'm using the term within a country, then I'm using the term a specific time period. So the first thing is that income we talk about is a flow variable. It's not a stock variable. It is a flow variable which would indicate that it would change its value over time. Anything which flows may not remain constant all through. You might experience change in the value over time, and we refer to a particular time period to talk about the value that accrues to the economy in that particular time period. So it's like, suppose I would say GDP of the Indian economy. What is GDP of the Indian economy? It is meaningless. We'll have to ask, what is the GDP of the Indian economy in the year 2021? What was the GDP of the Indian economy in the year 2021? What was the GDP of the Indian economy in 1970 or 1970-71 financial year? So simply telling what is GDP is meaningless. We'll have to say which period you are talking about. So specific time period comes to the discussion. We need to talk about a specific time period whenever you are measuring the income, whether it is GDP, GNP, NDP, NNP, whatever you measure. We need to talk about a particular time period. So GDP of a particular time period has nothing to do with the last year's GDP or this or next year's GDP. It is this year's GDP we are talking about. You cannot say, suppose last year you had produced something and it was not sold. That cannot be a part of this year's GDP or this year's income. Even if it was not sold, it was already accounted for last year. This year's GDP is this year's GDP. Last year's GDP was last year's GDP. Okay. But then how do I measure it? GDP is the monetary value or the market value of all the finished goods and services. So GDP is measured on the basis of the market value of all the goods and services. So why do I attach a market value or the monetary value? As you know, each good is measured in its own way, using its own measuring rod. For example, we measure petrol in liters, apples, oranges, rice, wheat in quintals or kgs, cotton in meters. So every single product is measured, or different goods and services are measured in different, using different measuring rods. So how do aggregate them whenever it comes to finding the income or the total output of an economy? Total output of the economy is the total crude oil produced, total cotton manufactured, total rice grown, total apples harvested. So we consider everything together. So how can you aggregate them? How can you sum them up when different things are measured differently? So you'll have to come up with a common measuring rod. Measurement, you'll have to come up with one common method of measurement. So we attach a value to everything, the price. We attach a price to the product. Each product you produce in a particular time period. It is the market price, the market value of the goods and services. So you have goods like Q1 is one particular good, Q2 is another one, Q3 is another one. So there are different goods we are talking about. One is petrol, another is diesel, third one is cotton, fourth one is potato chips, sixth one is, suppose, a computer. So you have various goods and each has a price per unit. So price per unit of each good is, suppose, let's say P, and the quantity is Q. So you have goods like Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and so on. So it is P1 into Q1 plus P2 into Q2 plus P3 into Q3. So it is price per unit into the quantity of that good that decides the value of that particular good harvested or produced or manufactured in that particular time period. So the price into quantity of each good, when they are added up, we come up with the total market value of all the goods and services produced. So this is one thing. But then again, you will get to know that whenever we talk about the market value, there is something called constant price. There is something called current price. Again, I'm not getting into that. So you will get to know that in that national income accounting chapter, where you'll get to know what is the difference between current price and the constant price. So we produce, we consider the market value of the goods and services. Now I'm using the term goods and services. So we consider the market value of what? Market value of goods and services. Market value of the total output. And total output comprises both goods and services. Goods, what is the difference between goods and services? Goods are basically visible and tangible, whereas services are neither visible nor tangible. If you take the case of India, in India, there are, or for that sense, any economy of the world, there are three different sectors in which output is produced. One is primary sector, led by agriculture. So it is agriculture and allied activities. Then we have secondary sector or the industry sector, which is led by manufacturing. The third one is the tertiary sector, which is also otherwise called the service sector. What are the services? They are IT, banking, insurance, education, health, transport. These are all services. In a country like India, if you look at the total GDP is close to $3 trillion today. Okay. If you look at the current income of the Indian economy, it is close to $3 trillion. Out of this $3 trillion, how much is the contribution of the primary sector? It will be about 20%. How much is the contribution of the secondary sector or the industry sector? It's about 25%. And the remaining 55%, about, you see, it varies from year to year. Just I am putting a value very close to the actual one. It is 55%. Services contribute about 55% to the total GDP of the economy, total income of the economy. And service sector is called the intangible sector. It is neither visible nor tangible. These are called non-material goods. Whereas goods sector, the primary sector and the secondary sector, they produce physical goods, which are visible and tangible. They are called material goods. And together, goods and services are called output. We simply use the term output, or many a time we simply use the term goods. They can be material goods or non-material goods. So the total value of all the goods and services are considered whenever you are measuring the national income of an economy. Next one is finished goods or final goods. So whenever you are estimating national income, we must ensure that there is no double counting or multiple counting of the same goods. You know, like that, again, this will be introduced to you in another topic, that whenever you are talking about method of measuring national income, there is a method called value added method. What do you do in the value added method? Suppose a farmer, wheat grower sells 5 quintals of wheat in a particular year, in a cropping season, at 2,000 rupees per quintal. So the total income the wheat grower or wheat farmer gets is 10,000 rupees. Where does he sell the wheat to? He sells the wheat to a flour mill owner. And the flour mill owner converts the wheat into flour and sells the flour to a bakery factory at a price which is 12,000 rupees. Now, the bakery farm converts the flour into bread and sells the bread to the consumers, you and me, at 15,000 rupees. Now, if I consider that there are only three players in the economy, entire economy has only three players. There is a farmer, there is a flour mill, and there is a bakery factory. These are the only three players. Then, what is the income of the economy? Can anybody say what is the income of the economy?
15,000.
15,000.
15,000.
Exactly. Because there is a value addition we are considering, or we are considering only the final good. What is the final good here? The final good here is the bread. Either you consider the final good, that is bread, or you only consider the value addition. The first person is the farmer. His value addition is 10,000. He gets 10,000 rupees from zero. So it is 10,000. Suppose that's what is his income. Then 2,000 is added. When the flour mill owner sells it to the bread owner, the bakery. So he gets 2,000 rupees. So that 2,000 rupees is the value addition at that level. Then 3,000 is the value addition at the next level. So either you consider value addition, value added method, then you say 10,000 plus 2,000 plus 3,000. Then you sum up and then say this is the total income, or you only consider the final good. Otherwise, there will be double counting or multiple counting of the same product. So there are issues related to that. I think that will be covered in the topic when the national income accounting will be discussed. Then finally, the GDP is about an economy. It's a particular economy we are talking about. Because I'm using the term gross domestic product, it is something, the term domestic I'm using here. So if I'm talking about GDP, anything that is produced within the domestic territory of a country, the value of that becomes that country's GDP. But then there is a difference between GDP and GNP, gross national product. Then you will come up with something like the goods produced here, but the company is not ours. IBM is located here in India, but it is not an Indian company. So whenever you are estimating GDP, you are considering IBM's income as a part of India's income, but it will not become a part of India's GNP. So in the estimation of the GNP, we consider the net foreign income, net income from abroad. Okay, we have people working here from abroad. Our people are working abroad. So then we see that what is the net income from abroad. If that is positive, that will decide what will be GNP, how GNP will be different from GDP. It will depend upon whether what is the net income from abroad. So these issues will be discussed much in detail by Professor Sahu when he takes up the national income accounting. I just wanted to tell you just one, because just straight away jumping onto income may create problems. So I thought, let me discuss what is GDP, at least for the time being, to give you some idea what is income. But then,
excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, can we get a 5-minute break, please?
Sure. Yeah. So I will now discuss. As you have asked for a break, I'll discuss now the circular flow diagram after a break of 5 minutes. Okay. So I have already given you some basics of what is macroeconomics and what is income. Then I'll discuss what is circular flow of income, and that I'll explain with the help of several diagrams. Okay, so we'll take a break now.
Okay, sir.